Choosing your career is one of the biggest and sometimes toughest decisions you're ever gonna make. And everyone expects you to do it when you're still in high school and be happy with it. They expect you to choose wisely when you're only a teenager who's still trying to figure your own self out. It's really crazy to me that we expect someone so young to make this kind of decision, and that's the whole thing, right? Expectations from society, friends, family, yourself, and the pressure of these expectations can be a little too much. And then there's also that fear of failure, of not living up to the expectations that people have about you, and worst of all, not living up to the expectations that you have about yourself. And that's how I've been feeling for a while now. I picked the wrong degree for me, and the worst thing is that I noticed almost immediately, but at first I was in denial and thought that I was gonna start liking it eventually. Spoiler alert, that didn't happen. But I also must admit that I didn't have the guts to drop out. And also I have this mentality that once I start something, I must finish it. Which can be a good thing to have sometimes, but it can also not be the best, as you can see. And my parents noticed how unhappy I was with my decision, and they were supportive and suggested that I switch my major. But the thing was that I still had no idea what I wanted to study. I knew I didn't like my current major, I knew that much. I remember being so jealous of the people who knew what they wanted to be when they grew up since they were kids, and I also was jealous of the people around my college who genuinely enjoyed what they were studying. But let's do a little flashback, shall we, to when I was still in high school so that you can understand how I ended up in this situation, okay? So there's this advice of studying what you like doing, you know? That whole capitalize your hobbies. And I thought going that route when I was still in high school, which ended up in me considering to study literature because I've always loved reading. Right now, I don't read as much as I used to, but at the time I did read a lot, so it seemed like a reasonable plan, right? Thankfully, I quickly realized that I loved reading, but I loved it as a hobby. And if I started pursuing it as a career, I was gonna start resenting that activity that brings me so much joy. So I came to the conclusion that I just loved to read my silly little books and fangirl about them. I didn't want to become a professional critic or editor. I just liked reading, and that's okay, it's a hobby. So I dropped the idea of pursuing a career in literature, and I was left with nothing once again. So I started to panic because college was getting closer and closer and closer, so I wanted to think of something else I liked and that I could study. So I asked myself, what else do I like to do? What's my passion? Who am I? I don't know. And honestly, that was perfectly normal. I was just 16 at the time. And like I said, how in the hell do we expect teenagers to make such an important decision? So what happened was that I ended up panic choosing, which is one of the worst things I could have done. And sadly, in my experience at least, quite a few people end up doing the same thing. Some of them, fortunately, end up in something they really like, but others end up in something that they don't like at all. And I was with the latter, of course. But I didn't know what to do, I didn't have a plan B, and I was doing good at that major. I had this scholarship I needed to go to college, and I was scared of not getting another one if I dropped out. So I just stayed and pushed through, hoping, praying that maybe one day I wouldn't hate it as much. And the truth is that never happened, and I became depressed. I disliked my college experience, I didn't enjoy it. My friends made it bearable, but at the core of it all, I was just frustrated and sad. So I saw the whole college experience through gray lenses. And it got worse towards the end of my degree because I just couldn't fathom graduating and working in this field. So my anxiety got worse, and so did my depression. During the pandemic, some of the puzzle pieces started to fall into place, and I started to really learn more about myself. I noticed some topics of interest that have prevailed since I was really young. I started to see a pattern in the careers I used to want to study when I was a child, and suddenly things started to make sense. So with the help of a psychologist, I started a vocational process, and once it ended, so much made sense. And I finally found something I could really see myself happily doing. But then there was the fact that I was really close to graduating college. There was the fear and sadness and disappointment of having made this mistake, and I felt like I was letting my family and myself down, and I hate letting people down. Is one of the things that I hate the most. So it was rough. Also, there was the fear of being too old to finally have figured out what I really wanted, and the fear of being too old to start a degree. But in the end, I understood that each one of us have their own path, that we have different times for things, and that's okay. And also, I understood that there's not such a thing as being too old. So I decided to finish that first degree I was doing because I was too close to graduating for me not to, and because of something my mom told me. She said that even though I didn't like it, that degree gave me knowledge and tools that can be useful in my journey, to not think of the time I spent studying this degree as time lost, but as a part of my path, of my journey. And that really resonated with me, and I think she's absolutely right. So I graduated, and now I decided to pursue something that truly makes me feel happy and fulfilled. And I finally feel like a weight has been lifted from my shoulders. I feel more optimistic and at peace with myself. I'm still a bit nervous about having to begin again, but I'm also finally hopeful about the future.